What's the deal, everybody? Welcome back to the studio. I'm Jeremy Deal, and today I'm going to be introducing you to the easiest way to create Aryeo 360 images and video. And this ain't it. Now that's what I'm talking about. Insta360 sphere camera. A 360 camera designed with the sole purpose of eliminating the drone from the shot completely. As you can see here, the way it is designed, with one camera on top and one on the bottom, allows you to use just this one single device to create a completely seamless 360 photo or video with absolutely no stitching, no lining up those clips manually in post. Today, I'll be talking about the basic features of this camera, why it's so much different than everything else they produce, and how I use it in my everyday workflow for real estate photography and videography. Let's dive in. All right, now before we get into it, let me just go ahead and say that Insta360 did send me out this camera for testing in the real estate world in particular. They're not paying for this video, and all the opinions and workflows within are my own. Just thought I'd mention that before we start. Now you might be asking yourself, why would I even need this camera? Do I actually need 360 aerial photo and video? Short answer, heck yeah, you do. Just take a look at these shots that were all done with my standard GPS drone. As a matter of fact, this DJI Air 2S sitting in front of you. What's nice about flying with this camera is it allows you the opportunity to reframe your shots after filming to give you a few of those FPV feeling shots without actually having to fly and invest in an FPV drone. Without the use of an FPV drone, these shots simply are not possible unless you use a bunch of aftermarket straps to put your 360 camera on the bottom and top of your drone and then manually stitch those two together like the way I had my drone rigged at the very beginning of this video. There's just something nice about having a system designed specifically for the use, not rigged together with whatever parts you can find. The way this camera surrounds the body of the drone and even has these cutout holes in the bottom to make sure your sensors and auxiliary lights are still functioning for you. On the left side here, you can see the main processor with the record button on the front, and this is also the side that the two lenses are strapped to on the top and bottom. On the other side, you'll notice this is the battery compartment, which is completely removable. The reason this design is so useful is because traditionally, and even with their first run at this product, these things were placed on the top of the drone. And that makes sense if you're trying to make sure everything stays as balanced as possible, but it did seem to interfere with your actual GPS signal from the drone and the satellites it needs in order to fly on the straight and narrow. They really thought about that one factor in particular when redesigning this and releasing it as their first actual commercial product. The last one had a very 3D printed vibe about it, and this one screams nothing but professional. It's smooth, scratch-resistant plastic, it's very lightweight, and even though I was personally worried about the two lenses sticking off to one side and how that may throw off the balance of the drone itself, I have not yet had a single issue with it, and the drone seems to recognize that and counteract that weight the second it lifts off. Now, if you look at this hard enough while I hold it out, you might be able to recognize one thing that I thought was a little wacky, but ultimately it makes total sense. This lower lens right here actually sticks down lower than the rest of the landing gear itself. This makes sense because you want the drone to be completely invisible, and if this lens was up, tucked in tighter, you'd be able to see these front legs protruding into the 360 image. This one thing will make your first takeoff process with this camera attached a very worrisome launch. But don't fear, because once again, Insta360 really thought about this. First of all, they give you these lens protectors that go over the actual lenses of the camera itself. Good thing, because if I take this off and show you it, I accidentally messed up and I have a new lens cover coming right now. Now, I think this is an incredible design. I wonder if they make these for the Insta360 One RS 360 edition. I've already dropped that twice and have a substantial scratch on one side, so that would be a useful product there. Who knows if it's around, but if you're listening Insta360, that would be awesome. Back to the topic at hand. And they also provide you this really nice launch pad that's a little bit squishy, but it does have a little bit of give and it's soft, and I would love to show you that, but I accidentally left it on the ground at my last shoot using this sphere because I left in a hurry. Now, This lens cover that I just mentioned is going to be touching that soft surface when you set the drone down, and it sits a little cattywampus, but as I mentioned before, it takes off easily with no problems, at least from my experience, and I've flown this system roughly 40 times by now. Depending on what task you're asking the camera to perform, either video, photos, hyperlapse, time-lapse, interval shooting, really depends on how long this battery will last. I've had this battery last me personally anywhere between 30 minutes and 50 minutes, just depending on what I'm actually doing and how long it takes me to get everything situated. I will give you one hint. If you get this camera, attach it to the drone, turn on the drone, and let it sit until all of your GPS signals have situated and you hit that magic 13 number for clear flight. While this camera system does not have anything blocking the actual GPS device on the top of the drone, I have noticed overusing it in situations where you typically get bad service anyway, you will get worse service with this. A little bit longer to actually make that 13 satellite connection. So, just something to be warned about in advance. You don't want to have your drone hovering and waiting to make that connection, because having this extra system attached to the drone will also reduce the battery life of the drone itself. I've noticed with my Air 2S, once again, it's difficult to give you an accurate time because wind is what seems to matter the most for my battery life, but it seems to get about 20 to 25% reduction in flight time from the drone itself with the Sphere camera attached, which means my average flight time goes from about 25 minutes down to about 20 minutes, maybe 18 minutes. As I just mentioned, anything you can do with the other 360 cameras, you can do with this in one system. This system does have one thing in common with the old rig system of days past, and that's simply the range issue. Once your drone gets so far away, you can no longer actually control the app and the camera itself. What that means is simply start your video when you launch the drone and you stop the video when the drone comes back. There's no readjusting in between. Where it gets a little more tricky is when you want to do 360 photos in particular, but there's a hack for this that makes it fairly simple. It just requires a little extra culling back on the computer at home. Simply put the camera into interval shooting mode and not time lapse. If you put it into time lapse, it'll take all these images and put them into a movie, and that's not actually what you want. Put the camera in interval shooting mode, and I personally do a 5-second timer, and that means every 5 seconds, the drone will automatically take a photo from the time it launches until the time I bring it back and stop that interval shooting process. Another tip to keep in mind while you're doing video or photos, even though I've noticed it shows up in photos way more than videos themselves, is to fly slow and steady, especially for photo mode. If your drone is flying around in the wind very hard and cantilevered to negate the strong winds attacking it, it will be noticeable in the 360 image, and from my experience, it's very difficult to remove that. That being said, once again, just take your flight nice and smooth and slow on this interval shooting mode. Take a few breaks here and there, and in the important parts where you really want that 360 shot, you should just hover and you'll have no problems. I know, that all sounds awesome. A really unique camera with a very specific purpose, and it works really, really well for that purpose. But where you'll really notice is in your post-production workflow, in which there's almost none. If you've done 360 work with a traditional 360 camera on your drone, then you know how difficult that can be. Not only is the launching and landing process much more difficult with a drone hanging a foot from the bottom of your Air 2S and another sticking a foot off the top, but the post-production of taking those two video clips or those two images and stitching them together to make a 360 globe shot without showing the drone can be super difficult, and if nothing else, super time consuming. The best part about this camera, once I finagle the SD card slot out of this really weird slot location right here and slide it into my SD card reader, the 360 image is already attached. As a matter of fact, it's already perfect. It's exactly how I use it 9/10 out of the time, and since it's an Insta360 brand, it matches up perfectly with my one 360 RS edition. So all my footage looks equal, all my 360 photos look like they've been taken with the same camera, and believe it or not, that does matter. It's much easier to match color tones from like sensors. I have a few more videos coming up in the future about this camera system, so I won't dive too deep into any of them or any of those details in particular right now, but just know in the future you'll see a few more videos and unique shots that I could not have personally done without this camera. I'll teach you how to use the camera to integrate 360 images into your current 360 tour workflow. We already know I'm using Cooler for this. And I'm currently 3 weeks into a 10-week documentation process of a construction site to hopefully be showing you the open space platform, a site similar to Aryeo, but specifically targeted to the commercial side of the industry. So remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more of that. And if you're already in love with this camera, then go ahead and use my affiliate link below to get whichever cool deal they're currently offering for this camera. If you want to learn how I use my 360 camera and my ONE 360 RS edition for basic walkthrough videos in the real estate world, you can check that out over here. And if you just want to see my most recent upload, you can check that out over here. As always, keep rocking and rolling, enjoy what you're doing, make smart business decisions, and I will catch you next time.